This is Whiskey Whereabouts. I'm Tim, and it's Octomore-Tober. We're celebrating with a nice sort of send-off for the 14s. 15s are starting to show up here in the US. So today I'm going to review the 14.3 for the first time. I'm going to compare it to the 14.2. We have the fully Islay grown version of the Octomore versus the more exotic European wine cask matured version. Let's see who comes out on top. My whiskey journey has taken me to Scotland and back. I've explored whiskey education, tastings, and distilleries from Islay to Speyside. And now my journey continues here, with you, on Whiskey Whereabouts. So Octomore is an annual release from Bruichladdich. That's where the 14 comes in. They're numbered. And it is a high ABV, high peat content by parts per million, measuring the peat content on the barley at the beginning of the process. And there are multiple versions of the releases. That's where the decimal point comes in. So 14.1 was the sort of the 0.1s are the base model. That's the bourbon matured Octomore. The 0.2 is the same spirit, but it's been matured in different casks, probably wine casks involved in this case here, 14.2. Pretty unusual cask configuration. Oloroso and first and second fill Amarone cask. It's an Italian red wine, lots of tannins. Translates as the big bitter, and that vatting is put together in French wine casks, red wine casks, for a year to finish it off for 5 years. 0.3 is different. 0.3 isn't the same spirit as the first two because 0.3 is produced entirely with Islay grown barley. And so we've got this sort of frosted glass bottle, transparent sort of presentation, trying to set it apart and showing that sort of purity, right? And so we'll get back to 0.2 in a little bit. Let's talk about 14.3. So it's not just 100% Islay barley. It was all grown at the Octomore farm 2 miles away from Bruichladdich distillery on Islay. That is the farm that gives this whiskey its name. And it's all concerto barley, as was the case for the 14.1 and 14.2, although, of course, Bruichladdich sources their malt from the mainland, so that's Scottish barley. When I said this was heavily peated barley, I meant it. Octomore is known as the highest by PPM peated whiskey, and this one's no exception. But I keep mentioning the PPM measures the parts per million on the malted barley at the beginning of the process, before it goes through the distillation. It's all kinds of factors that can impact how this is going to sort of present and come out when it finally becomes whiskey in this bottle. So we're not giving a number that measures the parts per million peat content of the whiskey in this bottle relative to other sort of whiskeys. But for what it's worth, the PPM on 14.3 is 214.2. The PPM on the barley, the malted barley that went into 14.2 was 128.9. For perspective, the PPM for Lagavulin 16 year is 35. We also have a pretty significant ABV at 61.4%. Talked enough to let this open up, and I'm going to go in neat. First thing that's striking about this whiskey, you see that ABV, you think this is going to be bracing. There's heat here. It's not a 46% whiskey. You know that. But it is not like singeing you. I'm going all the way in, taking a nice big, it's got my attention, but it's not sort of abrasively hot at all. There is smoke, but the smoke is much more subtle than you're expecting. You think, you see the big PPM number, and you think, this is going to be like putting my face in a campfire. The smoke is dissipated. The fire's been out for a little bit. It's kind of settling. It's in the air. It's atmospheric almost, but it's there. It's there. It's not overwhelming. The flavors are jumping out of the glass, and none stronger than a real butter quality. There's a salty quality here, and it is blending in with some other elements here, and I'm getting really buttery Chardonnay elements. Then there is some sweetness. This has opened up a bit. This bottle was open less than 2 weeks ago. It is a little bit less concentrated. It's really on brand for Octomore-Tober. I'm getting apple, maybe caramel apple, candy corn. I'm getting some citrus, a little bit of lemon, but it's more orchard fruit. It's closer to, peach along with that apple. There is a mintiness that was not there on the first couple of pours. It's really kind of come out. It's nice. It's offsetting that rich sweetness. It's fresh. It's minty. Something else that's come up only in the last, probably 2 times that I've had this, including this. There's a new leather, an oiled leather, great clean, new, fresh leather element. At the bottom of this nose, there is that Bruichladdich butyric acid note. It is the note that some people will analogize to baby spit up or vomit. There's something else that's a little bit more lively. I'm getting like a green chili pepper, and there's like a cigar box. A lot of different parts of the flavor wheel here, right? Pretty intriguing nose on this 14.3. Let's check the palate now. Not hugely hot on the palate, more heat than the nose, and I'm able to sort of just kind of hold this neat first sip on my tongue, trying to pick out the different elements. It's peppery. It has that sort of tingle, that sort of numbing, sort of black pepper tingle on the tongue. It's not overwhelming or anything. It is smoky. Now we've got the smoke. I've got that sort of ashy smoke. Again, it's not a roaring fire. It's an older fire on the tongue and rising into the sinuses. Neck pour, very chocolate sweet. It still has a chocolate element, vanilla, but now I'm getting butterscotch pretty heavily. Let's go back on the finish now. It's a pretty awesome finish, to be honest. And the first thing is it's huge. It's long. It's still going. Got this sort of warmth filtered all the way down here. This is the smokiest and the hottest experience here. This is where you feel the heat. Especially that first one, that first sip. It first comes out the gate. You've got some heat. It's not quite abrasive. It's very, very lively, very peppery as it sort of first hits your tongue. And as it begins to develop, you get successive sort of waves. Smoke all over the tongue. Still, it is as if I have some sort of miniature fire burning sort of at the back of my tongue. That smoke is still rising into my sinuses, talking about it right now. Waves of sweetness. Vanilla cream. Red berry. Pop of that mint again. As it just never seems to quite recede, but as it just continues to develop. You've got a really nice trace element of that sort of ash smoke. It's not real bitter and casky. And what you're left with is more with the smoke, with the sort of remnants of that sweet, that sort of vanilla. It's almost a vanilla honey now, with maybe a little bit of strawberry coating the sides of the tongue, sort of as it develops. It is a pretty impressive finish, and sometimes a finish can kind of be everything. This builds. Each stage is bigger and maybe not as complex. The nose is probably the most complex, the most different types of notes, but it gets bigger, it gets bolder as you go through the experience of this whiskey. Sitting around just drinking this, though, we're probably going to want to see, can we drink it? Is there anything to be unlocked, but can we drink it at this high ABV with some water, or is that going to ruin it? Ooh, it's gone sour. It's okay. That butyric acid element that I was talking about is much higher in the mix now. Yeah, there's still a sort of a prickly liveliness here. That sort of hot green pepper element, the mint, the peach, that big sort of bourbon cask sweet elements, they're really turned down. The smoke is still there, but it's just like I was describing before. It's really dissipated. It's still in the air, but it's kind of cleared out. I've had time to kind of air the place out after the fire's been going. It's less complex. Maybe when we're just trying to enjoy the whiskey, we're more worried about the palate. Let's see what happens. Okay, much more drinkable on the palate. And it wasn't as if it was difficult before. This is really easy going on the palate. Yes, there's more smoke. The sweet's really condensed now. It's really chocolate vanilla on the palate. There's a little bit of that pepper sort of liveliness still. I'm not really getting anything new, though. I'm really not getting, on the palate, a lot of new elements. What it's done is kind of concentrate some of it, and it makes it very sippable. I'm talking about the palate. We're going to get to the finish. That palate is a real easy sort of sweet, chocolatey, with the sort of smoked ashy kind of chocolate, milk chocolate, sweet chocolate on the palate. On the finish was the hottest and the smokiest, and it's still very smoky. It's still long. Nothing can water down the length of this finish. It's still going. I still have that prickly kind of sensation from the heat of this whiskey on my tongue. I still have sinus, that smoke is still sort of billowing up. Mouthful of smoke. It is very sort of chocolate vanilla up front. I'm not getting those distinct waves that I got neat, which was such a roller coaster ride. This is kind of just coming at me, getting a little bit more casky, kind of tannic, bitter, little bit. So it starts a little chocolate vanilla swirl. Now I've got sort of a darker chocolate, almost coffee ground, not quite. Before I rate 14.3, I'm going to pit it head to head against 14.2. I poured it in the sort of blind tasting Glencairns. It has been placed randomly. I do not know which whiskey is which in which glass, for what that's worth. We'll see how long that lasts. A lot of overlap between these whiskeys, but we'll see how obvious it is. But as a reminder, if you haven't seen my video, I've already reviewed this whiskey on the channel. I'll put a link up here if you want to check it out. But it is a paltry 57.7% ABV with only 128.9 PPM. I already talked about the casks on this whiskey, so I'm just going to get into it. I start on this side traditionally when I do these flights, so I'm going to start with this one, whichever it is, and just knows that this one is bigger. It's richer. This one's sharper. It's bright. And there's a problem, because this one has a specific note in the nose that's pretty telltale because of the cask configurations. A real toasty, almost like coffee kind of bitter element. It's not as impressive as this one, just going in like this. Let's see about the palate, though. This is 14.2. And what 14.2 has with those sort of Amarone casks is a sort of a really strong kind of coffee. I don't love that sort of bitter element. Going back for the finish very quickly, it has distinctive sort of waves, but one of them is that sort of bitter kind of coffee wave. The other is kind of a really nutty, slightly oily, but sweet kind of element. It's not quite as integrated. This is an impressive whiskey. I reviewed it as such. It's always so telling, even if you kind of can figure out pretty quick. When you put them sort of straight head to head, easily superior. No question. No question for me that 0.3, for all the reasons I talked about already, is clearly the superior whiskey. Yes, this one has the sticker that identifies as 0.3, but it's just there was no questioning which was which. I think when I rated 14.2, that was still before I was doing the sort of separate ratings for the, with the value as part of it. And we're gonna have to talk about value now. Octomores are really expensive. For 5-year whiskeys, they're sort of absurdly expensive. And this one is no different. And so in the case of this whiskey, I really enjoyed it. 14.2 was a very impressive whiskey, and this is easily its better. This is one of the better whiskeys that I've had on the channel. It's 5 glasses on what's in the bottle. But about that value, I've seen this whiskey at one of the sort of major sort of chain spirits retailers here in the US, maybe the biggest, for as much as $370, which is an absurd and ridiculous price to pay for a 5-year whiskey. I don't care how narrow the spirit cut is. I don't care about Islay Barley. That's an absurd price to pay, and please don't pay that for this whiskey. That being said, I have also seen it at, I wouldn't say reasonable, but much more manageable prices in other places. It depends on your market. Again, it's a sort of a limited sort of premium thing, and the price can fluctuate wildly by, I've seen, $100 swings. I've seen this whiskey for as low as $260. And now we're talking about overpriced whiskey, but now we're talking about within striking distance of not absurd. Here's the thing though. Now, relatively recently, Master of Malt started offering shipment to the US in some but not all states. And they charge a very hefty shipping charge, obviously, but the whiskey is cheaper at its origin. And so we kind of now have that benchmark of how much is it going to cost for me to get this kind of special whiskey if I got it shipped with that shipping. And Master of Malt will ship this whiskey to the US for $275. And so that's kind of the price of this whiskey as a sort of benchmark relative to the other retailers in my mind. And that is less than I paid for my bottle of 14.2, which I reduced some value of my final score because of how overpriced it is. This remains overpriced at any of those prices. It's a very special whiskey. It is quite an accomplishment to have a whiskey with that huge PPM numbers, those huge, this big, rich ABV that comes off as balanced, drinkable, not sort of just overwhelming like it's yelling at you. This is a whiskey to sip and savor and enjoy, and I am trying to pace myself. You can see the level already where it's at. So I am going to deduct from the perfect sort of 5 glass rating, just because we continue to kind of have to pay a real premium to get our hands on these, but this one is really, really solid. Really solid. And I'm going to just say 4.75 glasses is final rating. If you enjoyed hearing me share it with you today, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of our future videos coming on the channel. You can press this big button that's going to come up right over here, and I'll see you on the next one.